Good afternoon. I'm Carmen Blair, the Deputy Director of the San Mateo County Historical Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's Courthouse Docket. Sponsored by Cypress Law and Heritage Foundation, the Courthouse Docket is a regular series of lectures and performances held here in historic Courtroom A. One of the valuable partnerships we have developed in recent years is with the Cow Palace. This partnership resulted in the exhibit, The Extraordinary Cow Palace, that is on display here at the History Museum through November 9th. The Cow Palace is also an important part of our permanent exhibit, Peninsula Innovators. There are so many stories that can be told about the Cow Palace. Last summer, we were fortunate enough to have Jim Fitzpatrick talk about his experiences with roller derby at the venue. Today, Jim has returned to tell us about his experiences with All-Star Wrestling. Jim Fitzpatrick is a former professional roller derby skater with the world champion San Francisco Bay Bombers. Prior to his skating career, Jim was the ring photographer for promoter Roy Shire's Cow Palace events. Many years later, with Shire's help, Jim created an evil, cowardly butler character, Mr. Goldsworth, who would accompany several of the evil wrestlers to the ring. Please welcome Jim Fitzpatrick to discuss one of the Cow Palace's major attraction, promoter Roy Shire's All-Star Wrestling, Big Time Wrestling.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Carmen, for everything you've done in the museum. The sad note, like with roller derby, a lot of the talent has passed on, or they're too old and unable to make it. But yesterday, I had a wonderful conversation with somebody that you might remember from the past. We spoke for about an hour and a half, got some great stories from him. His real name is James Alt, and at the age of 7, he ran away from home and had a lot of family issues, abuse and so on. He lived, sometimes he'd hide up on roofs of buildings and sleep up there. Eventually he was taken in by a group of people, these bizarre fighters. They kind of had like an underground fight club. And eventually he became what was known as smokers, where they were banned in a lot of states. But what happened was people would go in there and they would gamble on these legitimate, basically like the Fight Club movie, legitimate fights. So he grew up fighting those type of fights. He eventually made it to the traveling circus, and he worked as a circus as one of the people. What they would do originally was they would have a real wrestler in the ring challenge people from the crowd. And what would happen is the people in the crowd, they'd have some plants in the crowd that were actually wrestlers, and they could put on a show. But the circus, or actually the carnivals, what they would do as a scam would be they would allow betting, and they knew who would win. And so the fights were rigged, and that way the carnivals were able to make some money off of them. And then eventually he did some professional boxing, and he was paid, and people have always wondered, is boxing on the up and up, or is it like wrestling? Well, a lot of the boxing, especially back then, was not on the up and up. And he was one of the people that was paid to take a dive. And he said, unlike a wrestling promoter that would come in and tell them in advance who's going to be the winner, what would happen with the boxing promoter at those events, the promoter would come in and kind of dance around the situation, and he would say, I don't think this fight's going to go into a 7th round. I don't think it's going to last that long, and walk out. And he knew that if he was being paid to take the dive, and the guy that he was fighting was a good fighter, he got a lot of abuse for those 6 rounds until he decided to take a dive. And we're also going to talk a little bit about Archie Moore, the famous light heavyweight champion of the world. He did a number of things with Roy Shires over the years, and he even admitted, just like in wrestling, a lot of the fights that were fixed for boxing, the corner man would conceal a razor blade in the cotton balls, and they would deliberately cut the boxer in between rounds. So a lot of the boxing was not on the up and up also. So, and then eventually He went in, James Hall, he changed his name, he started to wrestle under the name Frankie Kane, and he became a professional wrestler. He later donned a mask and was part of a tag team called the Infernos. But the people out here that used to go to the Cow Palace and watch television, Roy Shire's promotion, they'll remember him as the Great Mephisto. So we have a few stories that he gave me. And Roy Shire's actually, his name was Shropshire. That's a mouthful. So what he did was he shortened his name when he started to wrestle professionally, because he was a professional wrestler. And he started out as a very successful amateur wrestler. And this is actually his protective headgear when he was an amateur wrestler to kind of protect from getting the cauliflower ears. So, and before we begin too, people always wondered about the ring ropes. We have a steel cable inside the ring ropes. So this is actually one part of the original Cow Palace ring ropes. Dane, Roy Shire's son, tried to sell all the ropes. Nobody would buy it, it was too expensive. So then what he did was he started to slice them up into pieces and sell them. So these are a few things I have at home. Sorry ladies, I'm married.
Pretty good.
Now I also tracked down somebody else that I think a lot of you, especially the men in the audience, might remember. Roy Shire used to incorporate what was known as Miss Wrestling. She wasn't a wrestler, but she was the one that would put the star up by the winner of the match on the board that had their names. And she would also, when they were promoting the upcoming Cow Palace event, she had a photo album, and she would display and turn the page as Pat Patterson was going to fight Ray Stevens. And it was always on a stand, and the way she was positioned, she was rather shapely, so a lot of times the wrestler's picture was kind of obstructed, shall we say. And she, one of them later became actually Playmate of the Month for Playboy magazine. I know what you're thinking. I have a centerfold here. It's not her. It's Andre the Giant. But
Don't taste that Calhoun.
there's a lot of, unfortunately, something horrible happened along the way that she explained to me in her time with Playboy, and she ended up testifying before the Attorney General on that. And also, now we're getting ready to begin. I'm very honored with you, the most honest people I've ever seen in my life, because this was sitting up here the entire time, and not one person tried to pocket it. I use this sometimes to revive my employer when I was a butler for the wrestling. So, in fact, that's my first press pass. I became a photographer for Roy Shire's wrestling promotion right out of high school. I showed some of my stuff to Roy Shire's ring announcer, Alan Bolte, at the Cow Palace, and he turned me over to their publicists, Pete Marino and Davey Rosenberg. I had no idea what Davey Rosenberg was all about. He just emitted sleeves. Very strange man. He was, at that point, he looked like he was approaching Haystack Calhoun's weight. Haystack Calhoun was 600 pounds. This guy was massive. And it turned out years later I discovered that he was also known as the mayor of Broadway, San Francisco's Broadway. And he promoted not only pro wrestling for Roy Shire's, but he promoted Topless and Carol Doda. And he ran for district supervisor because he wanted to make things, I guess, easier in his dealings in that area. But, okay, this time I'm prepared. I brought some pictures. Let's see. This is a look at the old Cow Palace. If you look at it, obviously it's different than today. They used to have windows. And since then, may have been because of soundproof reasons, they've sealed off all of those windows. And then this is the lower portion going up Geneva Avenue, and those buildings in the front, the long, narrow buildings. There are 3 buildings connected, exhibit halls, and then on the other side are 3 more exhibit halls that are connected, and there's a covered breezeway in between, and that's a lot of times where they'll put the cattle and different things. And for roller derby, oh yes.
About what years are we saying?
I'd say that's probably early 60s. And so they're also used, we actually use those, one of the exhibit, they're called bays, as where we had recruitment and training for roller derby. And then this is the whole site map. The top center section is where the old drive-in theaters used to be. Okay, then, as Carmen said, I was involved with roller derby as a fan. I used to watch them. Me and my brother used to run me into the furnace in our garage on skates. And eventually I skated for the team and then coached them when we revived them. My all-time favorite was Pat Patterson growing up. He started out as a heel. A heel is the bad guy. Babyface is a good guy. I might as well mention that at this time. In the old days, we were lucky. We grew up in a time where it was treated as wrestling kayfabe. That's an old Carney term, where it's presented to the public as it's legitimate, it's real. And nowadays, actually it was Vince McMahon that really exposed it to everybody as saying it's not real, it's sports entertainment. But his alternative, his reasons for doing that was he wanted to avoid the expenses of getting the state athletic commissions involved in his matches so he could save a lot of money. So that's why he exposed it. He felt that it wouldn't hurt the business, and it actually didn't. But so we grew up in that time. So in the old days, I wouldn't want to relay a lot of these stories too, because I kind of believe in that philosophy. If you're involved with it, why crack open the curtain and expose it? But those times have changed. And in fact, when Roy Shire retired from wrestling, he was very bitter and upset with other promoters and some of the wrestlers that he felt screwed him. So what he did was he went to the LA Times and he exposed the business. And then later he went to the Sacramento Bee, which was his second big building, the Sacramento Memorial Auditorium, and where he filmed a lot of his, at the television station up in Sacramento, his cards. So he also exposed it in that article as well. So that means I'm free to talk about what actually happened. You get to hear all the dirt today. That's repeatable. Okay, that's Alan Bolte, the ring announcer that did the programs. Prior to him, there was Victor Berry, that was a ring photographer and printed the programs. And Victor went on to become very close friends with the great Mephisto. And he used to take a lot of publicity pictures with him and Mephisto's servant girl and the elaborate house that they lived in. And it was actually Victor Berry's mother's house. And the servant girl that Mephisto used to abuse was actually Mephisto's wife. And he didn't really abuse her. And so, and that's Earl Maynard. He actually was a, see, in wrestling, they'll say things about themselves that aren't really true. They'll kind of stretch the truth. And he used to call himself Earl Mr. Universe Maynard, and he actually was a Mr. Universe. He won multiple bodybuilding contests throughout the 60s, and actually that was a time when he was actually wrestling. So he would take some time off and enter these contests and win, but then he'd go back and wrestle, and then he'd enter another one. So you'd figure, what if he had never wrestled and his body was totally healthy, what he could have looked like? But he later became an actor as well, and he was one of the henchmen in the movie was called The Deep with Jacqueline Bisset. Okay, there's David Rosenberg before he put on all the weight, the publicist. And these were some of the pictures. See, when I used to go with my brother or my dad or with some friends, we were sitting way up back. And with my camera, the faces looked this big. Finally, at ringside now, I can get right up front and see all the action. But it was dangerous up front. Not only was the wrestler trying to fall on you, possibly falling on you, but back in the day, they should have thought it out better, but they would serve beer at the Cow Palace. So they would pass the cup down, it was filled with beer, but all the beer didn't fit in it. So then they'd pass the bottle down to the person. So sometimes when they got upset with the outcomes of the fights, or they had too many drinks anyway, they'd start to throw the bottles. And I will never forget one time, anybody from the Cow Palace here, we snuck down to ringside. We were in the back of ringside. And during the match, people were pretty upset. And somebody from way up top threw a bottle towards the ring. They missed the ring, they missed the wrestlers. I heard a scream, and I see a woman with long blonde hair, head covered with blood, rushing down the aisle out of the building. So it was dangerous. One of the guys in high school, he sat across ringside at one point, and he told me that he was sitting there. Somebody had thrown a dart at a wrestler, missed the wrestler, and he said he's sitting on the other side. He said he sees this right about eye level, a dart fly past his head. So and then unlike today, wrestlers today, they have the barriers that they put up when they walk down the aisles. They're more protected. Back then, the people would just go right over to them. Some people smoking a cigarette, they put their cigarette out on the wrestler's back. It was dangerous. And the Cow Palace was a long walk back and forth from where the curtains were. And so this is, I put my pictures together in a book. But if you notice on the top, Dean Ho had given him a karate chop, and you see the spit flying. I thought that was one of my best action shots. But when I took pictures, Morocco was one of the wrestlers that would always spit when he got hit. And I'm sitting there ringside taking pictures, and then I'm just amazed. And I look up, mouth wide open in amazement. He gets chopped, the spit comes flying. Needless to say, it was a hole-in-one. Now, this is a later fighter, Chris Masters. He later fought at the Cow Palace with a different promotion. But I had to throw this in. I took this picture. I wish I had this lens when I was taking pictures for Shire. It's a 600 millimeter lens. If you look at the tattooing on his arms, that is foreshadowing. One afternoon, where his mother lived, he lived nearby, an insane neighbor got into her house and held her hostage. And this is legitimate because it made the news. They had a lot of reporters and newspaper articles on it. So he shows up, word got back to him that his mother's trapped inside. They got a hold of the police. The police and he were trying to break the front door and they couldn't get in. By the time the police finally got the door open, the guy inside set the house on fire. And so they couldn't get in that way. There was too much smoke, they couldn't get in. They're waiting for the fire department. He went around the side of the house, there's this big tree. He upends the tree and breaks the window, gets in and rescues his mother. On the news, he has gashes all over his arm. So that's foreshadowing. Okay, that's one of my characters that I portrayed. And I had a long career with roller derby, and then with the fire department, I hurt my back and stuff, and it's like, why would I get into wrestling? So I made sure they could not touch me, and I said I was 93 years old. So I came up with a bizarre character, and Alexander G. Bernard was one of the guys that I was his employer, and his girlfriend, Kimberly Diamond. And this is legitimate. I never worked in the ring with Hulk, but I did take a publicity picture with him. The background is doctored. I figured restroom stalls in the back wouldn't look so good, so they did a better back. And then rumor had it that I may have played some other characters, but we won't go into that. Now, believe it or not, I actually got into the ring with Pat Patterson twice. He was brought out here to pay tribute to him shortly before he passed away, his last few years of his life. And so I was his butler that day. I brought him his favorite drink, I brought his old green jacket, and he gave a Q&A session. Then the next night, he was honored at the Cow Palace. And being a revolting, disgusting butler, Dylan Drake and I crashed his time in the ring. And needless to say, it didn't go well for Dylan Drake. Pat Patterson ended up cold-hocking and knocking him out. That's me trying to make a beeline for the ropes. And that's Patterson letting me know that he would have got me. So now this, fine looking gentleman, now we'll get on to the good stuff. This is Joe Malkowitz. He was a professional wrestler in the early part of the 20th century. And he retired from wrestling in 1935 and started promoting wrestling in the Bay Area. By the 50s, he did 2 events at the Cow Palace that were pretty successful. But he was getting older, and he kind of got lazy. So, just one second. So as he's slowing down, Roy Shire, who was a wrestler, wrestled for him on several occasions, but he wrestled around the country. And Roy would eventually get hurt. He'd hurt his knee, and he would want to get into promotion. And he'd offer to either buy him out or partner up with Malkovich, and Malkovich said no way. So Shire would end up running opposition to him and put him out of business. But prior to that happening, that's actually Roy Shire's. And his real name is Roy Shropshire. And again, this was all when he was an amateur. And he held titles, he was in magazines, covers of magazines, he's very successful. And at the late 50s, he started wrestling tag team matches with his brother, but it actually wasn't his brother, but they were billed as the Shire brothers. And his brother was played by, Ray Shire was played by Ray Stevens. And so eventually Ray Stevens would become his first big famous heel when he worked for Roy. And that's Roy with one of his title belts. And then just like years later when Ali and Inoki had a boxer versus wrestler, Roy Shire had a series of boxing matches, boxer versus wrestler, against Archie Moore, the world light heavyweight champion. And in the articles that I found, on one event, Archie Moore knocked out Ray Stevens and Roy Shire. Another time, Roy fought him separately, got knocked out. And another occasion, Roy knocked Moore out. But they were works. They were not legitimate. Over the years, Moore fought, I think, 20 different mixed fights like that. And some of them were legitimate, some of them were set. And Moore would actually later work for Roy Shire's as his special referee for special feuds. And in fact, this is one of their matches that they had, mixed matches. Oh, actually, for the matches, though, Shire had to wear the gloves. And that's Roy getting prepared when he was doing his workouts for the match. And his wife was driving the car. And that's Roy and Archie Moore in the ring. Now, Ray Stevens. So he became the first big heel when Roy Shire started promoting wrestling in the Bay Area. And what happened was, he had worked for an organization back east that used television very successfully. So he felt the Bay Area is the perfect place for wrestling. The weather is better during winter. The towns, he put the events on in Richmond, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento. They're all fairly close, where you can come back that same night and go home, versus being stuck on the road on these long trips that some territories had. So Ray became one of his first big stars, and for the good guy, Howard Gomez became his big star. And they developed a huge feud. But when Roy wanted to start to promote, he figured, I'll get on television, I'll start to promote an upcoming event, and he goes, the only place I can do it at that I think it deserves to be at, it's going to be big, will be the Cow Palace. So he met with the Cow Palace, and they worked out an agreement, but the CEO of the Cow Palace at the time said, what do you think you can draw? This is your first time out here. What do you think you can draw? And he goes, I'll sell it out. He goes, and they laughed at him. Everybody in the meeting laughed at him. But they agreed because they needed a tenant. So they signed the agreement. Shire left, and then the word was that Shire went outside. A man with a very bad temper stopped, went back inside and said, and I won't say exactly what he said, but he said, if you ever laugh at me again, I'll throw you out the window. And I guess they felt, well, this guy's got chutzpah, you know, let's see what happens. Biggest crowds, sold the Cow Palace out. I think they had roughly 2,000 something extra people standing room, and they turned away about 3,000 people. And that was his start. There's another shot of Pepper Gomez when he was younger, and this was their big feud. So now Pepper Gomez is billed as the man with the cast iron stomach. And some people are like, well, they exaggerate these things. Well, Pepper Gomez, I saw it on television. They drove a Volkswagen up onto his stomach. They drive it off, he gets up, it's fine. Later he would do a thing where he would have a ladder. They'd open up the ladder, they'd bring somebody from the audience up and have him jump on his stomach, both feet onto his stomach. No problem. You know what's coming. Out comes the bad guy, the heel. That guy's a little scrawny guy. Let a real man jump on his stomach. So the wrestler gets up, jumps on his stomach. In fact, Ray Stevens did that. He goes, let me try it. He jumped on his stomach. Now you're talking about a heavy wrestler. Jumps on his stomach, no effect. Wait a minute, I wasn't prepared. Let me try it again. So Stevens goes up to the top, and his signature move was the bombs away, where you come down knee first onto somebody's throat. So needless to say, Ray Stevens comes down with the knee on the throat, supposedly, and Gomez is spitting up blood. They take him to the hospital, and sure enough, he miraculously recovers, and the feud takes off. But he legitimately, when they landed, they did land on his stomach, not the throat. That would not be good. But Gomez would actually go around the country to the different territories doing basically the same type of formula, where the bad guy would end up doing something to him and then the feud would take off. But these are the old days where this stuff wasn't seen on television, there's no internet, so people didn't know what was going on elsewhere. Otherwise they would have said, oh, that's been done, this is a joke. But, and in fact, that's Stevens giving Gomez bombs away. And here's actually a picture of him when he was down at the LA Olympic Auditorium. And in this case, he's using his tag team partner, but his partner is up on the top of, not the top of the ladder, but he's pretty high. He's over 6 feet high. He's going to jump both feet right onto the stomach. And it makes absolutely no sense. Because there's footage of him doing that. You figure you go a little bit off, you can crush a sternum, you can break a rib, you go a little too low, he'll be singing with the Bee Gees, I mean, it can be bad. Okay, Walt Harris became his, Roy Shire's announcer. He was also the announcer for roller derby, and it was Channel 2. So that was the thing that really helped Shire, because the television, he could build week after week, kind of like a soap opera, leading up to these big events. And Harris was a great announcer. He treated everything like it was legitimate, very professional, and the fans loved him. Now, wrestling has always played off of really, really bad racial stereotypes. Some wrestlers were actually Japanese, some looked Japanese, and were billed as being from Japan. But they were almost pretty much typecast as being the evil Japanese wrestler playing off of World War II. And they did the same thing with the German wrestlers, or people that looked like they were German, and the Russians. And so he was one of the bad guys, Mitsu Arakawa. And the other one was Kinji Shibuya. Sometimes they would team together. And Kinji later actually did a little bit of acting. And that's him on that episode of Kung Fu. Yeah. But I guess he was typecast because he played the evil guy, and he was cowardly evil. He tried to kill him from behind with the help of somebody else. So that was from Kung Fu. And that's Ray Stevens when he was getting older. Ray Stevens, they said, was a great guy, the life of the party, loved to have a good time, drank excessively. It's a double-edged sword with him. I think he must have given Roy Shire's ulcers, because when he had this huge feud built up with Pepper Gomez and they drew such a big crowd, the return event was going to be at Candlestick Park. He was convinced that they could get 50,000 people because they had turned away so many people. The media was covering it. It was so hot at the time. And unfortunately, Stevens, what he did was he used to love to race motorized go-karts. So he does a race in between matches and breaks his ankle. He's off for months, kills the momentum of this whole thing. Finally, when he came back, they still started to draw really good, but it never got to that level again where they could actually go into the candlestick. And that's a picture I took of Pepper Gomez when he was getting older. These guys, a lot of them, I mean, they real lengthy careers. And here's Bruno Sammartino. He was the world champion. And he would come out, I get parched. Back in the old days, they had what was called the National Wrestling Alliance, and it was a cooperative of these different independent territories that were under the National Wrestling Alliance. And so the Wrestling Alliance would look out for them, help them, so that somebody else wouldn't run opposition to them. But also, they would exchange talent, but they would let each individual territory have their own champions. So Shire had the United States Championship belt and also the World Tag Team belts. But the world champion was controlled by the National Wrestling Alliance. And Bruno was a very powerful man, but in the older days, prior to that, they would use wrestlers that were called hookers. Not what you're thinking. Hookers were guys that do these special moves, techniques. They knew all these hooks where they could legitimately snap somebody's arm, leg, wrist, whatever, very easily, no matter who they were fighting. They were the elite of the fighters. Street fighters, they knew it all. And those were the ones that were usually the ones that were billed as the world heavyweight champion, like Lou Thez. And the reason for that was if they went to a different territory, somebody might not go with the program when he was supposed to win, and they would try and steal the belt. So they wanted to have somebody there that would travel the world, even to Japan and so on, that could hold his own and make sure that that didn't happen. And, so at this time, Bruno was the world champion. He came out and he fought Ray Stevens, and at the Cow Palace, Ray Stevens defeats him and now has 2 titles. But he defeated him by Bruno being counted out of the ring. And in Roy Shire's organization, that was a legal way to win. But back east, the promotion that he normally worked for, that was not the right way. You couldn't change titles on a count out. So at the Cow Palace, everybody's elated. He won the world championship. Later in the week, it's basically taken away from him. And then Bruno goes back to his territory. He never lost the title. So that's how that was working. Now, the original Sheik, he was not born there. He was born in the United States, but he was a very dangerous person. And then they used to have an advertiser for the car sales in Daly City. And so one time during the commercial break, they would film the commercials at the television studio. The Sheik gets in and demolishes the car. He just breaks it up. He starts pounding it, denting it, tearing off the windshield wipers in the commercial. And the owner of the company is outraged, supposedly outraged. The next day, he said in the media, he said he had never had so many phone calls to his dealership where everybody wanted to buy that car. And then the Sheik actually would go on to become his own promoter and wrestle back in the Detroit area. And, oh boy, this guy. The great Pampero, he was born in Argentina. I looked it up in a million places, and they all say the exact same thing. He used to come out with a shrunken head, and they all say the exact same thing. It was not a work, it was real. It was given to him by some tribal person in Argentina that when he was young and fighting, was so impressed with him, gave it to him, and he traveled with it for years. After he wrestled, his wrestling days were over, he became a postman in San Jose.
Where's my mail?
And then,
Heck, where?
then Pat Patterson came to the area. Oh, and the different announcer now is Hank Renner. He was up in Sacramento. And what happened was, roller derby was the #1 show on Channel 2, wrestling was #2, and then suddenly wrestling is pulled from Channel 2. And it's like, why? Roy Shires used to love to chew tobacco and spit it. And it was his kingdom. So he would just spit it on the floor in the station, and they would have to go by and cleaning it up. He'd spit here, he was all over the place. So they had a new station manager came in and warned him, do not do that. He continued to do it. The guy gave him an ultimatum, one more time you're off the air. He did it one more time, and he was off the air. And so it obviously it hurt his gates at the Cow Palace and so on, because the Cow Palace is so big. But he eventually got on a UHF channel 44, and started to build things back up again. But Patterson came out to the area. Originally, he's from Canada. Interesting note that he said was he originally didn't want to become a wrestler. You know what he originally wanted to become? Well, he was, I'll give a little hint, he was Catholic. Yeah, he wanted to become a priest. And the priest, when he met with him, he said he just enjoyed being up there at the altar and, you know, the music playing and everybody looking at the congregation. He just loved that. He loved the attention and everything. And the priest, he said, told him, he goes, you're far too adventuresome. You would not make it. And so, but he ended up, he left right around in his teens, came down to the United States, became a wrestler, and Mephisto actually ran into him hitchhiking when he was in Texas. And so he was just, you know, struggling to try and make ends meet, and Mephisto introduced him to his promoter that he was working for at the time in Texas, and he showed that he had skills. So he kept learning along the ways, built up a reputation, and then Roy Shires ended up bringing him in to work for his promotion. And his interviews were priceless. When Walt Harris was the announcer, he used to call Walt Harris Four Eyes. Walt Harris never wore glasses, but he would call him Four Eyes. And just come up with the weirdest. Oh, I almost forgot. They would film interviews in front of the crowd in Sacramento. But after the events were over, the television, everybody would leave. They'd clear the building, but then they would film now the commercials for the Cow Palace, because they didn't want them up there knowing what was going on down here in case they might duplicate the same story lying up there. So the studio's empty, the lights are dark in the background. They would put the cameras in close on the wrestlers so you couldn't see their lower bodies. Shire would be in the back in the control room looking out the window. He couldn't see the floor either from where he was, but he would get upset if anybody screwed up an interview. He'd scream at them, berate them, because he wanted to get out of there. And especially if they started to laugh. But he never knew why they were laughing. This guy, the evil guy, and then the world champion, tag team title holder, or sometimes the U.S. champion, he was a practical joker. He would get on his hands and knees and get on the floor while they're filming the interviews, like, I'm going to get you Pepper Gomez, or I'm going to whatever, and he'd crawl under the view of the cameras over to where they were, you know, being interviewed, and he'd start to tickle them. And then sometimes he'd actually even start to try and pull their tights down. And then these poor guys, sometimes they say you could actually look at the interview and you'd start to see them kind of like they're trying not to laugh, and their stomachs are going, and then if they did start to crack up and they'd have to refilm it, Shires would be screaming at them, but he had no clue it was Patterson. So, and then there's Patterson again being interviewed. On the right's Pepper Martin. He was a wrestler that started to do color commentating, and also he did some acting. He was in The Longest Yard in different movies. And in the middle is Dr. Ken Ramey, who was Patterson's manager at the time. We have no idea what kind of a doctor he was. He was Dr. Ken Ramey. There's Patterson fighting during an interview at the television. And you can see the television studio, very small studio. The ring was very thin and small. Very few people in the crowd, but because they were so entertaining, they were able to pack the Cow Palace and these other big venues. And Patterson sometimes would wear a mask as well. And he'd hide in his trunks a foreign object, a piece of steel that he would insert into his mask and headbutt the guy and knock him out. He'd always denied it. Well, today I'm going to teach you how it's done. If you have an eraser and white medical tape, Patterson would tape the eraser and use it as his foreign object, his piece of steel, or a motel or hotel bar of soap that he would tape, and that was his piece of steel, his foreign object. And then Billy Superstar Graham, one of the first really big, powerful bodybuilders, he used to work out with Arnold. He started to wrestle for Shires, and he became Patterson's tag team partner. And that's when we interviewed together. Sometimes they would both don a mask, and they would both have their foreign object with them.
What year is that from, that picture?
I'd say this is probably around 71.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that taken at the Courthouse?
Well, this is up at the Sacramento studio.
Sacramento.
Yeah. And they say after everybody would leave the studio and they would be filming those other interviews, a lot of the kids would try and stick around and listen against the big, steel or metal doors to see what they're saying. And sometimes when the wrestler would go over to the door and just start pounding on the door, and the kids be scared to death. Okay, that's Patterson, and they became champions, Patterson and Superstar Graham. Oh, and there's Archie Moore, the former boxer, playing the part of the referee for one of Shires when Patterson was fighting against Ray Stevens. They were originally tag team partners also, but then Stevens turned good, and Patterson remained bad, so they became bitter enemies. And then later Patterson was a reformed man, and they became buddies. But it's funny that the guy that jumped on Pedro Gomez's throat apparently became his tag team partner. Forgive and forget. Wow. And this is around the time that, like the program says, Patterson a good guy, suddenly he became a good guy. Now, as I said before, a lot of times what the wrestlers say about themselves, how they're billed, is not true. This is Peter Maivia, and he was billed as a high chief, Samoan chief, and it was legitimate. He would, a few years later when he became and this is one of his fans, later became a professional wrestler, Sika, whose son is Roman Reigns now, who fights for the WWE. But he was involved in some of the Samoan riots that they used to have at the Cow Palace when Peter was getting beat up, thinking that it was totally legitimate. And they said at one point he was in the back, handcuffed, bleeding, and they, I guess Maivia finally said, I think we better smarten him up. And instead of being mad, he ended up saying, I'm going to do this for a living. So he became a wrestler. And there's actually Peter Maivia, actually he went through the ritual with the tattoos, which are basically from just below his knees all the way up around his waist. And it was a thing that some of them would take months to get completed. And because of his wrestling schedule, not wanting to miss wrestling, he had it done with multiple people over a 3-day period with a sharp tooth and mallets. And unfortunately, too much ink in his body, they think, is what later contributed to health issues. And this is actually I was so interested in this, that this is what the back of his leg, right leg looked like, the tattoos, the front, and the side. I mean, it was unbelievable the amount of time that they spent doing this for him when he became high chief. And he started teaming with, during that period, Rocky Johnson. Now the little guy there is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a famous actor.
Wow.
So initially, Peter Maivia didn't want, Rocky started dating Maivia's adopted daughter. He didn't want her getting involved with a wrestler because he knew what the life consisted of, but he finally consented, so they got married, and That's Dwayne. And then that's Rocky later. So you can tell where Dwayne got his body from. And speaking of big, that's Ernie Ladd. Ernie Ladd was a professional football player. He originally played with the Chargers, played for the Chiefs, and then also for Houston, for the old AFL. And he became a wrestler. And he was so good at getting people to dislike him. Back in the day when football players weren't paid that much, he said it's time to do wrestling full time. Because he would actually do wrestling in the off season. You'd figure you'd be recovering from football, but it's like they weren't paid that much back then. So that he would wrestle. But then he loved it. He made a very lengthy career out of wrestling. And also speaking of big, there's Haystacks Calhoun, 601 pounds. And actually for the big man, in his prime, he was actually pretty agile. Sometimes he would team with, that's him and his daughter. And then sometimes he would team with, but in this case, he's in a different territory. He's fighting against another big man who's about 600 pounds too, Man Mountain Mike. Now going from big to small, that's Little Tokyo. He was actually born in Japan. And he became the world champion for his division twice. And for the women, Minnie Marilyn Monroe, Darlene Dagmar, and she had a lengthy career as well. And speaking of the women's division, the world champion was Fabulous Moolah, and she had a very bad reputation. She was the one that trained women wrestlers. They had what she controlled was called a stable. They would live on her property, had to pay rent, had to do all these chores for her. She would train them, and then she would book them out to the different promoters she had agreements with. And they would come out sometimes to Roy Shire's promotion. And what she would do is she'd say, I'll make it easy on you promoters. Send me their money and I'll pay them. So she ended up pocketing a lot of their pay. Shires and other promoters always assumed that the amount that they were getting, she was getting her take and they were getting their full amount, but they weren't. Oh, how did she get in there? Adrienne Barbeau. Well, believe it or not, Adrienne Barbeau was one of the first Miss Wrestlings.
Yeah.
And she went on obviously to a very famous career. You can probably tell why people didn't see the photographs when she was turning the pages. And then Mickey Garcia, there's Patterson looking at her. She became one of the other Miss Wrestling. She became the playmate of the month for January one year. And then she ended up actually working for publicity for Playboy for a number of years. And then sadly, there was a lot of stuff that was going on in Playboy that was pretty disgusting. So she ended up testifying before the Attorney General on it regarding drugging, a lot of things that were going on. And so that all got exposed. It was like a 10-part series that they did on it. She was one of the playmates that came forward, and that's Mickey also when she was in Hawaii. So she doesn't live in California anymore, but I was able to track her down. So she says she really had a great time working for Shire. She said he was a fabulous businessman, but horrible at dealing with people. Very abusive of the wrestlers and also even the announcer Hank Renner that when she was doing it. And then Sandy Hertz, she was another Miss Wrestling. She was the last one. And she actually, I don't know if anybody would remember her, she actually appeared on Johnny Carson a couple of times doing skits, the Dean Martin Show, and the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast. One of them was with Jackie Gleason. And that was another one. So switching from beauties to beasts. Now, I actually saw, there was two different bears that were famous for touring. And this one, Victor Bear is the one who's taking a lot of these pictures. This is Victor the bear, and he was about 7 feet tall. Here's another picture of him showing him standing. And he was actually trained They were declawed, and their teeth were removed, but they had a muzzle on them. And one of the wrestlers described that he tried to actually, they would have mixed matches with the wrestler going against the bear. And he said he did something, and the bear got on top of him, and he said all of a sudden the bear they have very long tongues. He said the tongue kept coming out, licking him on the, through the muzzle, licking him on the face. He couldn't get the bear off of him. And then this is the other trainer, David McKigney. He would wrestle sometimes, and then he would sometimes be the referee for the matches. And his bear was Terrible Ted. And this is his other bear, Smokey. And in this picture, you can see this bear still has his claws and has his teeth. And tragically, this bear, one time he left the cage open when the phone rang. He ran inside, got the phone. The bear got out, not Terrible Ted, but this one, and mauled his girlfriend to death. Yeah. Okay, this is James Alt, who later wrestled as Frankie Kane under the Masked Infernos and became the Great Mephisto. And he had one of the most creative characters. He claimed he had one leg shorter than the other, so he wore a special boot. And it just conveniently had a different colored heel on it, so it would really stand out to telegraph that it was, there's the boot. And he claimed his circulation was bad, so he tapped the boot for his circulation, apparently. But what was going on was he would dislodge a piece of steel in his heel to the front of the foot, then he'd kick the wrestler in the head and knock him out. So finally, his feud with Patterson, which is pretty entertaining, went on for months. Patterson knocks him out on television, interfered in one of his matches, unlaces his boot, and steals the boot. So at the Cow Palace, Patterson's wearing the boot, and he ended up, I guess he had the same thing, his foot must have gotten numb, so he tapped the boot and knocked him out. But Mephisto got great heat, and in fact he got so much heat. Speaking of heat, Anton LaVey, the Satan worshiper that lived in San Francisco, the infamous guy that had the Black House out in the Richmond district, he was a huge wrestling fan. And he loved Mephisto because, in fact, in this picture, he assumed he was giving a satanic symbol on television instead of normally like somebody would point at you. He saw that and he thought he was a Satan worshiper. So he wanted to, because he later admitted his whole act, that was an act. He didn't believe it, but he pretended to be, and that was how he made his money. But he wanted to become Mephisto's manager. And so he had his people approach Mephisto up in, I think it was Sacramento, after a wrestling event, and Mephisto he didn't have time, he said he was too busy. So another time at the Cow Palace, he's leaving the event. The crowd is furious. Some people waited for him on the side of the building to attack him. He comes out. They start to chase after him. He runs back to the Cow Palace. The door had locked behind him. He couldn't get in. All of a sudden, a car pulls up, and it was the people, Anton LaVey's people, and they rescued him. So they asked him, "Don't you want to meet our boss?" So he said he went to the Black House, the Satanic House in San Francisco. And for a guy that grew up tough kid, street fighter, legitimate fighter, he said it was the creepiest, scariest place. He wanted nothing to do with that guy. And the guy actually had a lion in his house. And at a certain point, he also had a black leopard. So Victor Barry's mom had a pilot's license, so she could fly planes and take aerial photographs, but that's how he got into photography. So one day he's at the airport, very different times, the plane is empty, and he asks, "Can we go on board and take some pictures?" "Sure, why not?" So they go on board, and the stewardesses start to come on board, and they decide, "Well, here, we'll serve you drinks and this and that." So he took all these publicity pictures with them, like that he's, flying his private plane. So they were just posed shots, but that's his wife actually smiling, because normally she She looked like that, very sad and scared to death of him when he would abuse her. But, his whole gimmick, he had the prayer rug. He would pray to Allah. He would go into a trance. He'd have foam come out of the mouth, which was Alka-Seltzer. And that's his wife again smiling because he's not around. And Archie Moore backstage. And there, Andre the Giant. So some of this stuff that they say about the wrestlers obviously isn't true. Andre was not 7'4". He was barely 7 feet tall. But originally when he was giving interviews back east with, when Vince McMahon was the announcer and his dad was promoting, they would have him stand on kind of like a milk carton or some crate or whatever, so he would look taller. And they would always have the cameras looking up at him. But they actually said that he was barely 7 feet tall, but he was billed at 7'4". He actually did, though, as he got older, got up to over 520 pounds in weight. He was one big guy, but early in his career, and he and Patterson were fighting together. They would team together occasionally, because Andre was from France. Andre Roussimoff is his real name, and Patterson was French-Canadian, so they both spoke French, so they got along great. And that's Andre when he was younger and better proportioned. And sadly, the disease he had, when he finally did stop growing height-wise, his hands and his face and his feet continued to grow. And normally a person with that condition would not live very long, so he unfortunately did pass away at an early age. That's him coming out of a bank, I believe. Yeah, and then, now he did not fight Muhammad Ali, but this is publicity leading up to the event where he would fight Chuck Wepner. Andre would fight Chuck Wepner in a boxing match, boxer versus wrestler, and Ali would go to Japan and fight Antonio Inoki. Now, the fight against Andre and Wepner was a work. They worked together, they knew what was going to happen. Ali was a boxing fan, he loved Gorgeous George, that's why he kind of modeled his interviews, ranting and raving after Gorgeous George. He assumed it was going to be a work as well when he went to Japan. It was not going to be. Inoki, and there's Wepner. Look at Wepner's 6'5". Look at the hand size difference.
Huh.
Unbelievable. Wepner also, after this fight, he actually fought one of the Bears. I think it was Victor the Bear. And there's Andre. All the stories about his drinking, it's true. That guy could drink anybody under the table. It was unreal the amount of alcohol he consumed. That's his hand holding a full can beer. Now, we all know how uncomfortable it is on long flights. Can you imagine he did a lot of touring over in Japan and everywhere else? He had to sit on 2 seats. If it was a smaller plane, he would lay down in the aisleway. Whoa. There's no way he could fit in a bathroom, so the poor stewardesses, you know, where they would pull the curtains back and get the food and everything prepared, they'd leave him a bucket, close the curtains, and stand guard.
Huh.
So it was not always a glamorous life for the poor guy. And this is the advertisements all around the country. They did closed circuit, that event. They did it at the Cow Palace closed circuit. Me and my brother saw it. We have a lot to say about that. But Winterland also had it, and it's interesting to show that this says this was the only telecast in the Bay Area that was in color. All the other locations were in black and white. 1976. So technology has really improved. Oh, so Ali got back early to Japan for publicity. He goes to the gym where Inoki is working out, and his people, his entourage, and himself realize right off the bat he's going to want to do this legitimate. He had a boxer in the ring. He's doing all of these diving shoot moves to take the boxer down, and he's getting 100%. And they're like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. So that's what screwed everything up. 1 week before the event, it's almost canceled. There's no way he's gonna fight you like that. So they had to redo the rules, and the rules became a joke because it was boxer versus wrestler, and they basically took almost every type of wrestling move away from Inoki's arsenal. That's not allowed, this isn't allowed, that's not allowed. And so the only way he could actually do certain things, he couldn't knee, he couldn't elbow, and if he did kick, he needed to be down on the mat. So basically what it did was, he now had to come up with just a few days before this event, either cancel the event and everybody hates you and you sponsors everything, it's a failure, it's a disaster, or go through with it. So Inoki would not reluctantly go through with it. He comes up with this strategy where he'll come out, dive towards the legs with his leg, try and kick all these legs out from under him, and then go for him. And it was 15 pounds of him basically almost the entire match on his rear end, on his back. And it was horrible. People were very upset, but it was legitimate. That's why it was. And in fact, this is when he came out diving, going for the legs. And Sports Illustrated covered the fight. And there's actually pictures of, by the end of the fight, all these calf, the back of the calf is a bloody mess. He had major blood clots, had to go to the hospital for days, and they thought he had serious damage to his leg because of that. So that's Inoki again going for the leg. The referee is the infamous Judo Gene LaBelle. He taught different techniques to Bruce Lee when they did, what was that, the television show in the Green Hornet. And he's been in a million movies as a stunt guy, and he also wrestled. But in the early 60s, the referee Judo Gene, he was involved in a judo, where he was a judo guy with a judo gi on, versus a boxer. And he legitimately won the fight. He put the guy in a chokehold, a legal chokehold, sleeper hold, put the guy to sleep. And it took quite a while for that guy to be revived. And the crowd got very upset and they started to riot. They thought he had killed them. Years later, and everybody's confirmed that this happened, Steven Seagal was supposed to be a notorious jerk on the set of movies. And he said that, Judo Gene said that he could put people to sleep, and Seagal looked at him and, oh, you're an old guy, you can't put me to sleep, not with my training. He put him to sleep. Okay, and as I said, regarding the stereotypes, so then Kurt and Karl von Bronner, they actually spoke German. Kurt on the left was actually interned in a prison camp by the Nazis during World War II. He survived that, but he went on to play the evil German wrestlers with their manager, Gerhard Kaiser. And this is actually early in the run, where in the background you can see the flags with the swastika, and also on Gerhard Kaiser's sleeve. Later, there must have been bad feedback at the station because suddenly you never saw the swastikas anymore, but you'd see an iron cross always. But yeah, they got a lot of heat for their roles. They would speak German in the ring so that most people didn't know what they were saying, but that way they could even like say, you know, that guy in the third row is a jerk or whatever, and they'd be speaking German to each other during their matches. Gerhard Kaiser was later a jeweler in Oakland. Today's cage matches, they say, oh, the old cage matches in Shire, you say, oh, that was cheap, that was ridiculous. Actually, they made more sense because they were so jagged on top and they were really jiggled, it was hard to climb out. And how can you climb over that without somebody grabbing you and cutting you to shreds? So this is what was left on Roy Shire's ranch. He had a ranch, the Coho Ranch up in Sebastopol. And he said he used to leave these fencing rolled up and just in the dirt. And then every year or two, he'd break it out for the cage match so the wrestlers couldn't get out of the cage. He'd have to fight until somebody was knocked out. and they'd surround, and then they'd tie it to the post, and they'd be locked inside. So that's the, Patterson's telling Daryl Kaiser, come on in the ring, and he's reluctantly coming in, and the Von Bonners are already in the ring. But you can see how high the ring is as well. And there was a fight a few years later where Moondog Maine climbed onto the top of the steel post to jump into the ring. He slipped, lost his balance, and fell to the concrete floor. And so he was actually fighting Briscoe, who was the world champion at the time. And Briscoe said, he goes, I saw the guy fall, and he goes, I thought the guy might have killed himself. And he goes, and I waited and waited, because he was playing like he's hurt. He goes, finally, he goes, I see Moondog is coming over where I could see him, trying to get back in the ring. So he goes, the guy is bleeding very badly, his head was split open, and he goes, pull me in. So he actually, for whatever reason, the show must go on, I guess Moondog felt. He actually let the guy pull him in the ring, pin him, and then go to the hospital. Now, Kenji Shibuya's other partner was a guy that was about 20 years younger than him, Mr. Saito. And Mr. Saito actually was from Japan, and he was tough. You can see the scar tissue on his forehead. He's on the road years later with this guy, Ken Patera. He was in 2 Olympics. He was shot put, 1 Olympics. 4 years later, he's in it for weightlifting. For 3 different lifts, the total weight was over 1,500 and something pounds. It's a record that still stands for the United States. For those 3 lifts, their totals. So he became a wrestler, and he entered the World's Strongest Man competition on ABC, maybe about 8 years after he had wrestled professionally. So you figure, what if he was fresh and not beat up? He took 3rd place in that, but that was after 8 years of wrestling professionally. So they're on the road, they're hungry after the fights. Saito's knee is bad, he's at the hotel soaking his knee, and then, so what happens is, he goes down the street to the McDonald's. They won't let him in, we're closed. He goes, but I see food there, there's lights on. Well, we're filming a commercial, you can't have any, you can't have any. So Patera said that somebody else came along who had gotten fired by them and is upset, broke the window. But the police come to their hotel thinking it's them. Whether it was or not, I don't know, but that's Patera as well. So, make a long story short, a woman cop and a man cop come to the hotel, and Saito doesn't understand much English. They get into an argument. He comes to the door. They get in an argument. They ended up going to prison for 2 years. Reduced sentences. The female cop, she had her front teeth knocked out. Her spleen was ruptured. And the male cop had his leg broken. It took 16 cops to arrest him. And after they got released, this guy has quite a sense of humor. He just nonchalantly says, oh yeah, he goes, well, they kept coming at me, so I just kept putting them down and stacking them up. He had no trouble in prison, though. He said that there was mainly a lot of black inmates. He said they love me, he goes, because beat the heck out of the cops. And he said, actually, should we wind it on up? Oh, okay. Well, we're running out of time. Let me just show a couple of things. Jerry Monty, he actually did win a couple of fights. And there's Fuji and Patterson. These are some of the other fighters. Smirnoff, Brock Riddle, Moondog Maine, and some pictures when I took it. And so basically what happened was Shires was getting older. He had health issues. He lost Patterson as his talent. Patterson went on to other territories. And so eventually his business kind of crashed. He lost another television station, and then it kind of came to an end. But had to kind of rush through that because we're running out of time. But if anybody has any questions, I can try and answer.
So who was Ray Stern? You know that name at all?
Yeah, he was another wrestler from the past.
He had a bunch of health clubs too, I think. didn't he?
Yeah. He had a name for himself as well. Yeah, a lot of these guys would tour all around the country.
Okay.
Tim, one name you didn't mention, maybe because I remember as a kid wrestling in the Los Angeles area, was Freddie Blassie.
Yes,
Freddie ever,
he came up here once in a while to wrestle, and even the announcer Dick Lane, he came up and filled in for Walt Harris when he was on vacation one time. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, thank you so much